Hello and welcome. I'm the personified manifestation of that sudden jolt of dread you're struck with when you notice the abstract shadows cast upon your wall, forming a pareidolia and uncanny horror through your drooping eyelids in the evening. Today we'll be venturing yet again into the world of uncalled for overanalysis, and today's victim is Minecraft. Every aspect of your life and how you think about the world is in some way influenced by the media you consume. As much as you may think your critical thinking skills are invincible, or that you would never be stupid enough to fall for a biased publication, the presence of propaganda runs much deeper than selective political journalism or glorified military recruitment posters. All media is in some way influenced by the people who produce it, and often in ways that most people would not initially think of. Absolutely nothing is apolitical, and protest all you like, but you will never be immune to propaganda. Propaganda, in its simplest terms, has arguably existed all across history and throughout many cultures, and it's a pretty broadly inclusive term that describes an ever-evolving and not entirely objective phenomenon. Propaganda can be most easily defined as simply any piece of media that seeks to manufacture a response in support of any particular agenda, and that concept has, needless to say, existed since human beings developed the capacity to grasp a narrative. Despite the broadness of the term, historical propaganda is typically discussed through things like overtly political and deliberately misleading publications produced by relatively recent movements. The way we understand propaganda currently has been a long, evolutionary tale that has progressed slowly all across the course of human history, but the specific way we've come to understand it within the modern era tends to draw on references that exist within living memory. The propaganda that resulted in witch burnings in the 1690s seems less socially relevant than the propaganda used by the Nazis against the Jews literally less than 100 years ago, simply on account of the fact that we can much more concretely recognize the modern influence of the Nazis that persists in mainstream media to this very day. Despite all types of propaganda existing on the same timeline of social development and self-continuing eventuation, the main pioneering force of propaganda in history that people will jump to as an example is obviously going to be Hitler. The Nazis controlled all the legally distributed content under their regime, and in a time where immediate, wider contact with the rest of the world was essentially inaccessible, this allowed them to further their narrative of heroism to the most extreme degree. Despite the underground efforts at resistance through niche, hidden publications, all mainstream media was under the control of the Nazis and reflected their agenda. This included everything from newspapers to children's books. The propaganda produced in Nazi Germany targeted pretty much every racial and ethnic minority, as well as disabled people, queer people, and anyone who opposed fascism or spoke out against Hitler. The media presence of the Nazis was carefully curated to portray objective heroism, and an unquestioned moral standard that it was legally mandatory to subscribe to. Hitler and his supporters were consistently framed as saviors from degeneracy, and the people he massacred were framed as either a sinister force of immense danger and power, or as vermin to be easily exterminated depending on which narrative was more convenient at a given time. To many people today, the media created during World War II to villainize Jews is clearly nonsensical and unfounded, such as this image where the message is clearly meant to be that Jews are blamed for the evils of both capitalism and communism. Classic communists, notoriously obsessed with maintaining wealth inequality. Nothing more communist than being a money-hungry banker, am I right? To the people consuming these pieces of propaganda, however, in a world where critical thinking was basically illegal, it didn't even need to make sense, it just needed to frighten. Communism was regarded as something scary and evil and of immense power, regardless of its technicalities, so associating it with the Jews was intended to manufacture a fear so great it would blind people to its own irrationality. Anything and everything evil and scary would be associated with the Jews, regardless of contradiction and nonsensicality, until the idea of a Jewish person was on par with true personified demonism in the average person's mind. That isn't to say that those complicit in Nazi Germany were entirely blameless, but merely to explain how they were manipulated into their compliance to an extent that should not go unrecognized. Nazi propaganda targeted all demographics of consumers and catered itself accordingly. Photos of Hitler engaging in conversation while smiling with young women and children were published to make him seem friendly and non-threatening. Children's picture books, such as The Poisonous Mushroom, which is a book that taught children the danger of Aryan-passing Jews through the analogy of a mother taking her son mushroom foraging, were published, and young men and boys were constantly, relentlessly bombarded with idealized fantasies of patriotic heroism to further the narrative that the Nazis were somehow unjustly persecuted saviors. While nowadays these historical examples of propaganda are widely recognized as being blatantly misinformative, Media produced under the Nazis has influenced aspects of pop culture to this very day. The various posters, books, and films produced by Hitler that portrayed Jews as ugly and subhuman contributed heavily to the ongoing villainization of ethnically Jewish features in pop culture that undeniably persists even now, reinforcing Eurocentric and pretty blatantly xenophobic beauty standards. Additionally, the propaganda tactics, arguably pioneered by the Nazis, have by no means died out today. Many of the tropes present in fear-mongering Nazi propaganda remain recognizable in right-wing media to this very day. For example, the vague, overarching notion of some kind of persecuted, heroic fight against ethnic corruption and the rush against censorship to save the American dream from, I don't know, brown people, I guess. This can be directly recognized in things like the recent moral panic surrounding the supposed war on Christmas or general potential censorship of Christianity. Something that sounds scary, and that's about it. See H-Bomber Guy's video on further information on why the war on Christmas is bullshit. And in case you hadn't noticed, these tactics still depressingly find themselves very effective among their targeted demographics. Propaganda is also often present in much more subtle ways. Most modern creatives who employ historically anti-Semitic tropes, such as giving their villains hooked noses and the like, do not intend to perpetuate anti-Semitism. They are simply mirroring the tropes they've grown up seeing used to convey villainy or stupidity or whatever else it is that they seek to communicate to other like-minded people who've grown up in the same culture with the same biases. Anyway, Minecraft is an open-world sandbox game owned and produced by Mojang Studios, and it is the most played video game in the entire world to date. Wasn't that transition seamless? Fully launching in 2011, Minecraft has received critical acclaim for its immersive game mechanics and innovative versatility, things which proved key to it maintaining such success over the years. Being a game with so much creative freedom, it's hard to run out of things to do, and the massive amounts of both official and fan-made extended media/content help maintain a dedicated and passionate community. Personally, I've been a fan of the game since the age of around 10, and some of my favorite childhood memories are heavily associated with the franchise. Being a weird, autistic kid, I found it very hard to find common interests with kids my age, and my immense fixation on this game was one of the few things I was actually able to share with my friends. And that was obviously something that meant a lot to me. I bring this up because I intend to make it very clear that the criticism I want to present here comes from a place of good faith, and a desire to see the game I love so much improve on some of its long-term flaws. I am well aware that being such a popular game, Minecraft has an incredibly passionate fanbase, and I'd like to avoid provoking as many of them as possible. I don't want to cancel Minecraft, I don't care about taking away your free speech and replacing every innocent pixel with my transsexual communist agenda. My intention is just to spread awareness around certain things I find troubling, in the hopes that more people will be more considerate about the groups they might potentially be alienating by including certain tropes in their work. Let's be real, Mojang isn't going to change their game because I asked nicely. I hope only to start a long overdue dialogue. Minecraft's original creator and founder of Mojang, Marcus Persson? We're going with Marcus Persson because I'm too lazy to Google how that's pronounced, aka Notch, has a reputation for his lack of desire for fame and notoriety. He seemingly came from humble beginnings, originally producing video games independently as a hobby, before the popularity of Minecraft established him as a true public figure, and these days he has pretty much no involvement with Mojang and the Minecraft brand. This is in part due to his own choice to move on from the company, but also partly because of a few of his own controversies. Notch has numerous times expressed right-wing sentiment on his Twitter account, which has led to accusations of transphobia, homophobia, and racism, obviously something Mojang and Microsoft don't want to be associated with. Because of what I can assume is a desire to avoid being associated with anything political at all costs, Mojang has removed all references to Notch from the game, and he is no longer invited to associated events. Based on what I've seen, Notch's controversial tweets seem very symptomatic of what happens when a reserved gamer is thrust into the public eye and unexpectedly finds himself with a reputation to uphold. He had some certainly bad takes, but his bigotry seemed like the product of miseducation and ignorance rather than genuine right-wing extremism, which I say because of the few times where he's actually backed down from the right-wing sentiment somewhat after things are explained to him better, which is something real reactionaries tend not to do. Nonetheless, Notch was, and still is, an extremely influential figure in the online community, and had a responsibility to not say dumb shit. And whether or not he overestimated his influence, he spread bigoted and regressive sentiment online to millions of people multiple times. Arguably, due to his lack of visible extremism, his approach was perhaps more dangerous than the average outspoken self-identified neo-Nazi. He was allowed a degree of plausible deniability, and the vaguely centrist persona he had at the beginning of his career made a lot more people more likely to listen to the things he had to say on things like the trans community, feminism, etc. Examples of subtle whistleblowing he made that were more sinisterly effective on an impressionable audience include his "It's okay to be white" tweet, commonly cited as an example of his controversial online presence. This is exemplary of a common tactic that racists and white supremacists employ to feel smart, the intention being a sort of gotcha moment, allowing Notch to accuse anyone who opposes the statement of racism against white people. Obviously, anyone who takes issue with the phrase "it's okay to be white" must think there is something wrong with being white, right? They wouldn't just be pointing out the obvious contextual agenda and historical implications of a phrase like that. They must hate white people. The issue with Notch using his platform to say "it's okay to be white" is obviously not that being white is a moral failing, and the people who use this dog whistle are well aware of that. The issue is that this statement is made in direct retaliation to anti-racism efforts, in the same vein as saying "all lives matter" is in retaliation to Black Lives Matter. These statements are objectively true. All lives do matter, and it is okay to be white, and no one has ever said otherwise. But by framing these statements as oppositional to anti-racism, white supremacists are able to recruit impressionable people by placing themselves in a position of persecution. A random kid online with no knowledge of systemic institutions of racism will see someone claim that they were censored for simply daring to say that it's okay to be white, and most likely side with that person, because they are presented as the rational alternative to the wild white people hating feminist SJWs. This is a blatant radicalization tactic used by the alt-right, and for some reason the creator of Minecraft was repeating it on his public Twitter to all his gamer nerd followers. An unfortunate situation, to say the least. Despite my pretty strong belief that Notch would most likely not consider himself a white supremacist, this is by no means a defense of his behavior, and while I'm well aware that his sudden fame definitely negatively affected his mental health, which is something I can genuinely have sympathy for, that isn't even close to being an excuse for his behavior and the things he almost definitely genuinely believes. So, did Notch's right-wing beliefs influence his work? I'm a person who believes that it's almost always impossible to truly separate the influence of an artist's personal identity and life experience from the finished product they export, and despite the desire for Minecraft to be a pure, universal, and apolitical game, it's clear that Notch's biases definitely played a part in the game's design, whether intentionally or not. And yes, this does come first and foremost in the form of anti-Semitic caricature. The main thing that immediately stands out to people is the villager and illager mobs and their suspicious designs. All of these models employ familiar tropes of anti-Semitic caricatures, such as large hooked noses and monobrows, traits common among ethnically Jewish people that have been historically demonized and associated with villainy and stupidity through various pieces of propaganda. Additionally, in early models of the game, the villager NPCs were incredibly greedy, requiring unfair and disproportionate trades in order to give the player resources. As I'm sure you know, an incredibly common stereotype associated with Jews is greed, particularly a love of gold. Villagers obviously don't trade in gold, instead using emeralds as a currency, despite gold being a present resource in the game. In my opinion, this could definitely be a deliberate attempt by Notch to make the Jewish stereotypes less overt, although that is just speculation. Notably, some unfortunate theories can still be drawn regarding the mobs that do trade in gold, piglins. Derogatory zoomorphism is a common tactic used in propaganda to dehumanize and villainize Jews, and this typically manifests through portrayals of Jews as animals, usually octopi, snakes, and pigs. The latter of these specifically often correlates with the trope of the fat banker, a caricature distinguished by animalistic features, a larger stature, and a love of gold. While probably unintentional, humanoid pig characters with an affinity for gold, especially in a game that has other anti-Semitic tropes, is just, unfortunate, and at the very least worth pointing out. Another immediate aspect that really solidifies the anti-Semitic intention behind the villager designs is the presence of golems, which are an overt and undeniable reference to Jewish folklore. Iron golems are a mob that spawn exclusively around villagers and remain docile unless the player attacks them or the villagers. They will also defend the village against hostile mobs. The Iron Golem is not a hostile mob itself, it's a neutral mob, meaning it only attacks when provoked, in the same vein as piglins, endermen, and I don't fucking know, bees. It can also be used to protect the player, and will often approach offering flowers, and drops iron ingots when defeated. In Jewish folklore, the golem is a creature that is constructed by a person to serve as their protector. Again, golems are typically not characterized as overtly hostile, instead being general protectors of either the individual creator or larger Jewish communities through physical strength. They are often not very intelligent, mainly serving the purpose of brute force and manual labor, and they are unable to speak. Minecraft's golem shares all of these traits, being significantly stronger and harder to kill than other mobs, as well as its affinity for presenting the player with puppies, serving as an indication of naivety. Additionally, it shares the same facial texture as the villagers, which indicates that it is of their construction. These are the main reasons people find the overall design of the villagers to be suspicious, but I'd also like to talk about their functionality within the game in relation to the player, as well as more broadly theorize on their in-universe status as a group, both independently and in relation to the other humanoid mobs. There is a sort of contextual storytelling inherent to the Minecraft setting. Despite having no clear story and no obligation to follow any specific narrative, Minecraft is and always was a game that lended itself to fan speculation with its extensive background world building. Any fictional universe that introduces species, peoples, and settings that aren't present in real life inevitably invites questions about how these concepts exist and interact with each other within their respective universes. And in the case of Minecraft, I highly doubt this was an accident. The origins and purpose of the fantasy mobs in the game are deliberately left very ambiguous, which largely contributes to the game's versatility and wide appeal. People who don't care about storytelling and world building can ignore these questions altogether and enjoy the technical aspects of the game without being forced to engage in anything significant to a larger plot, while nerds and game theorists can discuss the deep yet subtle psychological horror and uncomfortably existential inquiries implied by the Uneasy Alliance achievement, while at the same time crying whenever they try to figure out any mid-tier redstone contraption. I'm the second one if you couldn't tell. Having a setting that leaves itself so mysterious is, in my opinion, a great decision and a major reason why I love this game so much. But there are certain aspects of this world that definitely raise my eyebrow. The first of these being the overt hierarchy that seems to exist among the humanoid mobs in the game. Villagers were originally coded with the same AI as pigs, and to this day remain incredibly incomplex. They are interactable exclusively to trade items without dialogue, they communicate with grunts and aren't hostile, they exist as subservient to the player, and a large part of the game is killing and stealing from them. They exist for the sake of providing the player with loot rather than being autonomous characters, and in all essentials they are barely distinct from the animal mobs that the player kills for food and leather. It's not as if they are just written as such to adhere to the general simplistic atmosphere of the game either. I say this because of the existence of illagers. They're sibling mobs who fail to share this subservience and thus are actively antagonistic and must be defeated. Serving as the closest thing to villains an open-world narrativeless game can have, illagers and their subset of roaming equivalents, pillagers, are notably also distinguished from villagers in not only their status as hostile mobs, but in their apparent technological and social advancements. They are directly representative of the severe economic/resource inequality in this universe and maintain power over the villagers through force and an apparent unexplained access to more sophisticated technology. What are you doing? The largest naturally spawning structure in the game that occurs in the overworld is the Woodland Mansion, a foreboding labyrinthian building that is home to what appear to be the most elite of the illagers. Woodland mansions are characteristically more complex than all of the other overworld structures, containing several examples of a more evolved understanding of agriculture, architecture, weaponry production, and the harnessing of supernatural forces. They are enormous, with a deliberately confusing layout and a randomly generated array of rooms containing loot, many of which are hidden in walls and inaccessible by normal means. Unlike villagers, who remain subservient to the end, failing to attack the player even when provoked, illagers respond with immediate hostility to the player's presence without provocation, which serves the purpose of adding a degree of difficulty to navigating the Woodland Mansion. The hostility of the illagers completely makes sense from a gameplay perspective. Implementing structures that are essentially just giant piles of loot without any obstacles wouldn't be very challenging or immersive. I completely understand why these choices were made practically, but I can't help but consider their implications under the lens of Minecraft's seemingly very deliberate contextual storytelling. The inhabitants of the Woodland Mansion structure hold a particular specific significance when analyzing the apparent social hierarchy that casually exists within the backdrop of this almost liminally simplistic sandbox game. There are the villagers, who are portrayed as unintelligent people with simplistic technology and who are seemingly helpless to prevent the looting and destruction of their societies by the player to a degree that is almost played as absurd or comedic. Then there are the pillagers and witches, who are actively antagonistic and attack villagers and players alike for an unexplained reason, as well as having access to advanced weaponry and magic that they do not share with villagers. Apparent rogues, agents of chaos and destruction, sustaining the oppression of the lower class through brute force without appearing to participate in any individual society of their own. And finally, there are the illagers that occupy the woodland mansions, distinguished from the rest by their apparent lack of a desire to roam. These illagers are by far the most atmospherically intimidating mob in the overworld, and hold a distinctive social intimidation on top of their technical strength, which divides them from the average hostile mob. Their craftsmanship can more easily rival that of the player, being capable of constructing far more intricate buildings than their villager counterparts, and they are frightening by way of their existence, jarringly sophisticated yet devoid of context. They do not wander the vast expanses of the earth, and they refuse to make themselves compliant to the impulsive whims of a player passing through in need of supplies. Instead, they remain secluded, waiting for one to advance upon them with purpose. The vastness, as well as the generative rarity of the woodland mansion, makes the player feel small and inconsequential, powerless and vulnerable. The long hallways and high ceilings indicate to us that we are an invasive presence, in a place that feels uncharacteristically stoic in comparison to the rest of the game. A structure that serves as a disruption of the familiar thematic undertone that otherwise remains consistent throughout all other potential overworld settings. The colossal, silent presence of this rare structure evokes the uneasy feeling of a place we have no right being in, but are inexplicably bearing witness to. Its unapologetic ubiquity displays unspoken notions of unnatural enlightenment and corruption, a suffocating air of completely grotesque, capitalistic tranquility. This kind of incredibly subtle atmospheric horror is by no means unexplored in other aspects of the game, and it's a part of Minecraft's general structure that I find frustratingly overlooked, perhaps due to our overfamiliarity with the game at this point making it wear off. However, nothing quite like the sinister atmosphere the Woodland Mansion evokes can be found elsewhere in the game, at least in my opinion. Unfortunately, the specific fears this horror is playing into often tend to coincide with conspiracy-driven anti-Semitism, and concerns that stem directly from the Nazi rhetoric we discussed earlier. For some reason, whether that be social commentary or the need for more diverse mobs, Minecraft is trying to present class inequality through its NPCs. It's trying to build a setting where one group holds all the power, and others must remain subdued and resign themselves to small, inconsequential lives that primarily culminate in some 12-year-old hacking them to bits with a stone sword. Like most overly simplistic representations of capitalist dystopia, it falls extremely flat. Not least because the presence of this class inequality is utterly insignificant and not once explored. After all, Minecraft's NPCs are more animals than characters. And it's not exactly a game that lends itself to overt political commentary, but also because the dynamics of the illagers and villagers are only significant in relation to the player. They are a backdrop, an atmospheric display to add an air of threat to the illagers through contrasting them against the utter submission personified that is the villagers. The illager represents the fear of too much governing power. They are the villager, but stripped of its quiet submission and instead given a sort of performative authority. The illager is threatening by way of its existence as a figure of corrupt elitehood, not as a way to present the victimhood of the subhuman villagers, but as a way to scare and immerse the player. Any type of illagers are not nearly the strongest or most physically threatening mob in the game, but that social intimidation exists to further the idea that there is a certain cunning among these mobs specifically, that the other inhabitants of this world do not share. If you're all familiar with the immense conspiratorial aspects of both modern and historical anti-Semitism, you should have caught on to what I'm getting at with this. The idea that our society is secretly run by some kind of ring of ultra-elites, usually humans, but sometimes robots or lizard people if you're feeling real spicy, is a dangerous and misleading oversimplification of capitalism at best, and full-on Nazi rhetoric at worst. The belief in a specific group holding all the power in society, whether that group is Jews or not, is a fundamental aspect of modern white supremacy, and it comes directly from the Nazis and the deadly propaganda campaigns that they orchestrated against the Jewish people. The group at the source of the evils of capitalism is fucking billionaires, not an ethnic and cultural minority. Not a small circle of satanic baby-killing lizard cyborgs either. It's billionaires. Billionaires are the problem. The people repeating conspiracy theories concerning the underground elite or the New World Order do not care about class inequality or any of the millions of people actually dying because of the real-world villains like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg. They either think it's fun to pretend they're scared of reptilian humanoids in the banks and ignore the people they're directly harming with their bullshit rhetoric, or they want to kill Jewish people. The concept of a small yet advanced group of elites engaging in sinister cult activities and exploiting the working class is inseparable from anti-Semitism, especially when the trope is utterly devoid of any form of commentary and purely exists to build a spooky atmosphere. I adore the Minecraft franchise. It's held a place in my heart since I was a little kid. But it's a pretty damn near perfect example of how historical campaigns of hatred can sustain themselves through the implicit subconscious and pop up all around us in seemingly innocent places. It's important for us not to turn a blind eye to the re-emergence of anti-Semitism all over the world in recent years, and a large part of being a good ally to the Jewish community is familiarizing yourself with the atrocities of the past. Failing to know our history dooms us to repeat it, and furthermore blinds us to its sinister remnants that still dwell all around us in plain sight. An inability to recognize anti-Semitic tropes as what they are is exactly what makes one vulnerable to propaganda, and likely to perpetuate the bigotry they fail to notice when they initially absorb it. Anti-Semitism is rarely as simple as, oh, eradicate the Jews, I hate the Jews. And contrary to popular belief, it didn't start that way with the Nazis either. Bigotry is subtle and manipulative, and your confidence in your immunity to it is precisely what makes you vulnerable. Remember, nothing is apolitical. Question everything, eat the rich, and don't leave trees floating. Hello, it's me, that thing from the video you just watched. I just realized I forgot to record an outro. I'm finishing editing I'm finishing editing right now, and I just wanted to say thank you very much for watching, unless you just clicked on this video and then skipped right to this point, in which case I think that still counts as a view, so thank you anyway. I'm trying to make this my full-time job. Ambitious, I know, I have like, I have a long way to go, but I'm trying to make this my full-time job because I have pretty much no viable career options due to a multitude of things going on up in here in the old noggin, but I'm trying my best. So thank you very much for giving me a view. If you could like this video or comment something mean about my face, I think me and the algorithm would both really appreciate that. My phone is slipping out of my hand. My hands are very sweaty and I'm only holding it with one hand. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching. I just got a new screen protector, so I need to